cold hardy. It'll have to come in well before the first hard freeze. But if you move it to a place that's just bright shade, it'll do much better. Okay, I guess a couple of other perennials that bear mentioning. Oxalis, gorgeous foliage, and can be grown in the pot or in the ground, either one. Will freeze back most winters, but comes back out. I find that the ones in my yard, I have to dig up and replant about every 3 years because they grow from a little bulb that's about this big. And it's like those things keep coming up because after about 3 years, I'll go out and all the bulbs are up on top of the ground. I just dig them up and plant them about 1.5 inches down and I'm good for another 3 years. Otherwise, they get up on the surface of the soil and they end up roasting. But this is a purpley form, which I think is one of the prettiest in the shade. There's also a pink form and a white form. Common name is wood sorrel. This is a new one they call charmed wine, just as a little bit more magenta color. But anyway, this is a great perennial if you replant it about every 3 years. This has to be one of the best plants of all if you want flowers in the shade. So-called shrimp plant, Justicia. There is a little bit redder form. There is a form that has variegated foliage called fruit cocktail. And then there is a yellow shrimp. But do not confuse it with a pachistache or lollipop. The ones that have the bright yellow flowers and little white bloom comes out of the middle of those bracts, that is not a shrimp plant, and it will not survive a winter. The true yellow shrimp is a plant that has kind of chartreuse-colored flowers, and it's absolutely ugly because the blooms don't fall off. As they fade, they turn brown, and it's a set of blooms with nasty brown areas all over them for about 2/3 of the time. As you can tell, I'm not real fond of the so-called yellow shrimp. But the most important, I mean, if you like it, get out there and deadhead it, and you'll do okay with it. The red shrimp is more or less self-cleaning. Hummingbirds love this plant. It grows in the shade. I've seen it come back after 5-degree weather. There's just virtually nothing that goes wrong with shrimp plant. It's kind of like the aspidistra and the green things. If you're looking for a flowering plant, if you can't grow this, you can't grow much flowering in the shade. But shrimp plant is very, very much worth having in a shady garden.
Can you trim those back?
You can.
Like in
Early spring is the best time. You can trim them any time, but you're losing flowers. It just never stops blooming.
Some that are this tall and going over, and
Yep.
some that are even processed.
Feel free for it.
Bob, how tall and wide does that shrimp plant get?
Shrimp plant is usually going to freeze partially, and so it's only going to be 18 to 24 inches tall. I've seen it 36 inches tall after a year when it didn't freeze, and it just sort of makes an ever-expanding clump. You know, if you put one of these in the center 10 years from now, it probably would have filled up the whole area. But they are not fast-growing, they're not invasive. But they are a very, very dependable flower for the shade. Okay, again, there are a few other things we could talk about, but I really want to move on and talk about some of the annuals for the shade. And of course, Impatiens, these are one of the most commonly grown and commonly killed plants in shady areas. They like plenty of moisture, but they don't want to stay excessively wet. And this plant will frequently droop in the heat. And if you say, oh, it's wilted, it needs water, and you go out and water it every time it wilts, after about 2 weeks it'll rot and be gone. So what I tell people about Impatiens is if it's droopy in the afternoon, don't worry about it. If it's still droopy the next morning, water it. But Impatiens come in a wide range of colors. They come in a wide range of heights. There's a new one out that I think will be pretty common next year called Sun Patiens that grows well in the sun as well as in the shade. But Impatiens are probably one of our most popular annuals for the shade, but they are also one of the ones that's most frequently killed from being watered too often, so keep watering in mind. The other frequently killed plant with kindness is the begonia. Begonias grow equally well in shade or in sun if they're planted early in the year. If you wait till now and try to plant these in the hot sun, you're going to have miserable luck. But if you plant earlier in the year, this variety happens to be called vodka. It's part of the cocktail series. The red one's vodka, the pink one's gin, and the white one's whiskey. So, you know, good plants. There are also many different green leaf begonias. And what I commonly hear people say is, oh, the green leaf one grows in the shade, the bronze leaf one grows in the sun. Wrong. Both of them grow equally well in shade or in sun. But if you're going to plant them in sun, you better plant them early in the season because they're tough to get established. And these are another plant that you really, really want to watch your watering. If you keep these things too wet, it's like they just pinch off at ground level. And we probably have 500 people a year come in and say, something's eating my begonias off at ground level. I go off and they're just falling over. They've just fallen over and something's cut them at the ground. You water them so much they rotted at ground level. Virtually, pill bugs may eat on the foliage, but I can't say, well, I'll rarely say I've ever seen this plant severely damaged by insects. It's virtually always a matter of keeping it too wet. But those are the two most common annuals to put in the shade. So let's talk about some more interesting things for the shade. Strobilanthus, or Persian shield. If you're looking for just beautiful color in the shade, strictly an annual. But Strobilanthus, I mean, you put this with something pink like Impatiens, you put it with a pink foliage, you know, like isn't that a striking combination? You can do beautiful things in the shade. But Strobilanthus is a great annual to plant in shady areas. Caladiums, great things to plant in shady areas. Do not expect them to live from year to year. Occasionally they do, but plan on planting them fresh each year. And you can plant the boring white and red ones if you like, but there are also some fun caladiums out there. Miss Muffet is this one. This one is maybe Clarice. I'm not sure, but there's some really unusual and different caladiums that come out, have come out now, and they are great plants for the shade. There are a bunch of real interesting new coleus out there. Again, don't give them too much water or you'll be sadly disappointed in how they do, but this is one they call fishnet stockings. As it gets bigger, it is very, very interesting. And some other flowers, the annual salvia, red, white, or purple, or salmon. These will grow for a season in the shade very well. This plant may be a perennial, but I'm not going to promise you it's going to survive the winter real well. It's not a caladium. It looks kind of like a caladium, but it's actually an elephant ear. It's an alocasia. This is a form of alocasia they call Hilo Beauty. And in a protected area, it probably will come back from year to year. But it is not as hardy as some of the other alocasias we call elephant ears, but really unusual foliage. And I love, there are more different unusual things you can do in the shade. Many people that get a shady yard hate it because they can't plant all the things they're used to. You can't plant roses, you can't plant crepe myrtles, you can't plant all those common things, but you can have a lot of fun with some of this really unusual stuff that thrives in the shade. Old-fashioned plant everybody's grandmother grew. Heliotrope. Great plant for bright shade. Just an intensely pretty flower, pretty foliage. Morning sun's okay, but no hot afternoon sun on this plant. But again, the flower heads will get up to where they're as big as a saucer on heliotrope if it's well grown. So it is a really, really showy plant. It might perennialize, but count on it as an annual. Be pleasantly surprised if it comes back. Same thing would be true of Hypowestus, the so-called polka dot plant. White, pink, or dark pink. Pretty little ground cover, but count on it being an annual. After about 6 months or so, it starts trying to flower, starts to get kind of tall and woody. If you keep whacking it back, you can keep it pretty, and sometimes it will last for more than a year. But plant it as an annual, and be pleasantly surprised if it decides to come back year after year. There are a bunch of different common name Joseph's coat, but the old-fashioned Joseph's coat is more of an orangey, reddy, pinky color, and it was really developed more for the sun. There are a bunch of colorful new Joseph's coats that do very well in the shade. Golly, there are too many of them really to talk about. There's 6 or 8 different ones in various shades of pink and white and green. But again, Alternanthera is the botanical name. And certainly worth planting where you want a little bit of annual color that's a little bit taller in a shady area. And what else do I want to talk about? I guess I really have to mention this plant. One of the most popular plants out there the past couple of years. This is it's in effect, it's a form of Swedish ivy. Everybody knows what Swedish ivy is, growing hanging baskets. It's a plectranthus. This is one of the plectranthus that produces an upright flower spike that just covers itself with flowers through most of the warm season. They call this variety Mona lavender. Everybody gets confused. They say, I want to buy a pot of that lavender. This is not lavender. This is plectranthus. It's a variety of plectranthus called Mona lavender.